My name is Cassie Summers. Welcome to the Curious Universe podcast. What are your standards like? I am so excited about this conversation. I was just at the hairdresser's getting my do done. And this woman is amazing. She's incredible. If you're ever in Kelowna, I'll recommend you. But she's not just good at hair. We were actually having this really cool conversation. And we were looking at these areas in our life where things don't show up how we would like them to show up. I'm sure you've had this experience at some time in your life, right? And we know with the tools of access consciousness, which is everything I use on this awesome show, is that when you have expectations of anything or anyone, often you actually kill limitation. So now let's say that you're an employer, okay? And you have no expectations of your staff. For some people, that can be really freeing. And you'll have staff that are like, oh my God, there's no expectation. I can go above and beyond. I can do this. I can do that. Like they're wild and free and they're creating and they're showing up. And for other members, they would be like, oh, well then, I'll just kind of coast along. I'll do the bare minimum, right? So what is that? What is that difference? Like what in your life, where have you had no expectations and something shown up like magnificently? And where have you had no expectations and it's shown up really crappy? And then what do you do? Well, I know for me, I have been that independent, warrior woman probably since I was 3. Okay. So I just I'm like, fine, you won't do it. I'll do it. I'll get this done. You're okay. You don't seem like you're actually going to help. I'll do it myself. I know a lot of people actually have clients that I work with that are like this. That's a cool capacity. I don't want to disregard that because to be able to rise to any occasion is actually really empowering. However, we also live in a world where we have access to a lot of people that can contribute to us, a lot of people that can actually come in and be a part of our lives. And so when you ask someone to come in for, let's say, a role, right? A role in your business, maybe it's a partner. And so rather than having an expectation of your partner, what could be different, or an expectation of your employees, what could be different where you're inviting them to honor you, to honor the job, to honor the partnership, to honor what they've showed up for. And in this conversation, I was like, what is that? And I started to go curiously into my curious universe world. And the more I started to ask questions, I started to see where certain people have a standard of living. They have a standard for how they would like to be treated. They have a standard for how much money they demand in their world. They have a standard for all these things, right? So what happens when you have no standard? What are you showing the world if you have no standard? What are you telling the universe? If you're like, I don't know, send me garbage, send me fresh fruit. I have no standards. Send me whatever. It's okay. I have no expectation. You see where I'm going? I could feel it. So let's use some of this clearing statement because this is like a doozy. Especially if this uniquely applies in your world. For some people, this won't apply. They maybe already have great standards. So if this does apply to you, if you feel like this kind of maybe some frustrations coming up, maybe some pressure, we're going to clear out that energy. Here's the access consciousness clearing statement: right and wrong, good and bad, POC and POD, all 9 shorts, boys, POVADs, and beyonds. If you haven't heard that, if you're new to the show, please go to theclearingstatement.com. I linked it in the show. It's going to explain how that magical tool works. I'm not going to explain it today, but it basically clears energy. Okay. So we're looking at everything that this brings up. And this training, great at right around, give back, talk about all nature's voice, problems. I used to have this business partner, and we were like traveling the world together, facilitating classes. And I was always like, why? We would have hosts, right? And the hosts were there for both of us, but they would treat her like gold. And they would often like not even bring me water, or not even like I would ask for something and it just like would never happen. And I'm like, what is this? Like, I used to judge myself. What's wrong with me? What's right about her? What's wrong with me? What's going on here? You know? Well, how much of that was a standard of living that my business partner had that I didn't have? Because my expectations were always never met. So growing up, if I had expectations of something, it never met. It never rose. My friends never like rose to my expectations. So I learned having expectations only created disappointment in me. So I stopped having expectations. And that's great, except for coupled with that meant that I also had no standards for how I was treated, which actually goes down to that whole self-love conversation. Because if you don't love yourself, then you have no standard for how you should be treated. If you don't love yourself, then you don't honor yourself, let alone anyone else honoring you, right? If you don't have that self-care, caring for yourself, then that will kind of broadcast that out into the world of like, oh, she doesn't need anything. Oh, she's fine. She has no standard. Everything she'll make work. So I just like fire hosed a whole bunch of information and energy. So let's take a moment and like expand it out. My apologies. I'm very excited about this topic. And I desire to gift you some questions to play in your universe and look at what is honoring to you for you. And do you go below that standard? Okay. So if someone has like, let's even take like food. Okay. I personally, unless I was deadly starving, wouldn't eat from a dumpster because it's not like within my standards. Right. But if I went out and I ordered food at a restaurant and it wasn't like super good, I'd probably just eat it. I know some people that's below their standards. So they're like, actually, you need to send me something different. You need to remake this. With that can have like this. Now here's where the judgment stuff comes up, right? Because there's a way of being like, hey, that actually doesn't work for me. Like my eggs aren't cooked. Not going to eat raw eggs. Or you burnt this. I would like something not burnt. And then there's that, those annoying kind of like the Karens at the restaurant. I was a restaurant server for 4 years, so I totally understand. And if we don't want to be like that, we kind of actually shut out that energy. So everywhere you've seen people with high standards and you judge them because maybe it wasn't the standard that you were judging. It was you judging you for not having that standard. Or you were judging the way that they were being with it, like the stuff that goes around it, like shaming someone, like how dare you, blah, 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 like shaming someone. And then you connect that with the high standard and you put them in the same category, but they're actually very different. If you just look like, what's your basic like standard? And if you have really low standards, then you might really want to look at that self-love piece for you. I know the more and more for me, friendships, relationships, playmates and stuff like that, the more I care for myself, the more my self-worth grows within me, not within other people's point of view. The more it grows within me, I start looking for different people in my life And as my standard, I'm using the word standard because I haven't really found something that matches better, but it's maybe not quite exactly the right word. But I think it's understandable, right? You got me. So my standard raises, my standard for kindness. I not expect, but I demand of myself to have people in my life that are kind. I demand of myself to have my back enough to lose people that are dishonoring. I have my back enough now. I have enough caring for me that I don't create relationships with gaslighters. So do you see how that starts to work? Like, it's like this little bit of a tangle. And so if you keep going and you keep going, you keep digging, but between down on these layers, you'll start to get this basic, like, worth of yourself, this value piece. And often that's where people's, again, standards can stem from. So if someone thinks that they're like the most valuable fucking person on this planet, then they often have high standards, which can translate into high expectations. But what if you just took the expectation piece out of it? Okay, just like throw it away. So you don't expect the cook to cook you the best meal because you're in a nice restaurant. But if your standard is to have the best meal, does that actually invite and entice the whole universe to deliver on that level? My sense is, yes, it does. I'm going to be playing with this, and I would love to know if you're playing with it too and what shows up. And okay, this is actually a great example. So I'm drinking out of like a mason jar. To some people, this would be below their standard. Oh, I'd never drink from a mason jar, but I actually really love this. And so standard is not attached to what's judgeably the best quality, the best things. It's actually what's true for you. So a great meal literally might be like going to a 50s diner and having one of those like big greasy burgers with like salty, crazy salty fries, and maybe like a cherry coke or a chocolate milkshake. Now, some people might judge that as like a low standard, but if that like lights you up, if that's like really delicious for you and your body, then that's matching your standard. You see, we're going a little bit down the rabbit hole here, because what we're untangling is you have this baseline of your self-value, your self-worth, your self-love. Okay. And then you create your standards of living from that. And then that standard, we attach judgment, we attach expectations and projections, we attach demanding of other people. And then all that attachment stuff is probably what like is distasteful for you. I know it has been for me, but when I really like pull it off, like that's actually not part of a standard, and that's actually not part of a standard, and that's actually not part of a standard. So if I'm not willing to be homeless on the street, which I'm not, that's my standard. Like I don't go that low. Like, and I'm not now. Okay. Now I say don't go that low. And then you might think, oh my God, she judges people that live on the street. Actually, don't judge people that lives on the street. That might be their standard of living. That's not my standard of living. So going low is going below my standard, whatever my standard is. Not from judgment, but from what works for me and my body and what works for my kids. What creates ease and joy and glory for me and my body? What if that was your standard? I froze there for a minute. So what if you looked at, if you raised your self-worth, would you also raise your standards? And would that actually create more beautiful, wonderful things showing up in your life? It doesn't mean that you judge. It doesn't mean because something doesn't match your standard that you're actually judging it, or you're disregarding it. And for those kind, caring people, I know who you are, and I know that that can show up. But that's actually not. It's just acknowledging that that doesn't match you. Doesn't actually match the life you're asking for. And the life that you're hopefully committed to. There's this great book called Home of Infinite Possibilities. I highly recommend reading it. And in it, there's this really cool conversation about money. It's a very different conversation than I've ever heard Gary Douglas, Dr. Dane here. And in it, he talks about committing to your life. And he said, if you were truly committed to your life, you would be unwilling to not have money. And I'm seeing that as part of this whole conversation, because if you're unwilling to have abusive people in your life, then that's that standard. That's that choice. And that's that self-worth. Because if you really cared about someone, you wouldn't let someone else abuse them, right? So you'd be like, that does not work for me, not on my watch, no way. If you had a little dog and it was like so precious to you, and someone just came along and like started spitting on it and treating it terribly, you would be like, no way. Yet how often do we let people, our bosses, our employees, sometimes our family, friends, lovers, treat us to a lesser degree than we would treat other people? So that means that you honor others more than you even honor yourself. You care for others more than you care for you. And then the world follows suit. You're not as important. You're showing us every day. We're showing consciousness. We're broadcasting that in the whole world. I'm the least important person in this room. Oh, if there's like a piece of pizza fall on the floor, it's fine. I'll take it. Right? Maybe not, right? You wouldn't take it. But if it's like, everyone else, go ahead. Let me take care of everyone else. This is like mom syndrome right now we're getting into. But what if you were willing to have the standards that matched your self-worth? And if they're still very low, then what if you went below that and looked at, what is your self-worth? Do you value you? Do you love you, the being and the body? And if not, what can you start to choose to actually grow that love, to grow that self-worth, that self-value in all these different areas, and see what starts to show up? See if your standards for living start to grow. See if your choice for something greater becomes stronger than your willingness to take the abuse or to settle for less. I don't know about you, but I am so tired of settling. No more settling. What if you didn't have to settle for anything? What if you really could ask for everything? And when you get that energy of where have you settled? Like even right now in your life, where have you settled? Have you settled with a job you don't really love? Have you settled with a partner that drives you crazy and hurts your feelings all the time? Have you settled for like a house that you don't really like, but it kind of is fine? If you had like, if it doesn't match your being, then is it settling? Yeah. Oh. And so what if you didn't settle? What if you're like, no, I will not settle. I have a standard. And that standard and that demand is something like only you can know. And not from force and pretense, but like, I know this like amazing man And he's talked to me about like changing hotel rooms. And because it like didn't work for him. And I can't even remember why it didn't work for him. And like all these people kind of like calling him picky and making fun of him. And I'm like, well, what if that's just you honoring you? Why does that have to mean that there's something wrong? Like we're almost programmed to settle all the time. And those that don't settle we start judging them. And I probably judge people like that. And maybe you have too, where it's like, oh my God, they're so picky. Oh my God, they're so demanding. But are they actually demanding of other people? Are they demanding in their own universe? I will not settle this lifetime. I didn't come here to live a mundane, mediocre existence. I didn't come here to survive. What if you didn't either? Everywhere you've settled is where you're less than thriving. So where have you settled in your world? Ask that question again. See what new stuff pops up. See what you become aware of. You might be like, oh, I've settled here. I've settled here. I've settled in this way. Okay, awesome. And what if you raised your standard in that area? And how much would you have to value yourself for that standard to raise? And anything that doesn't allow that, will you destroy and create it, please? Right, wrong, good, bad, mock, bad, all day, chores, boys, moments, and beyonds. Woo! Do you sense the change? Something's changing there. It is. It's energetically changing. You might not get it cognitively, but I can sense the threads. This might be a podcast that you want to listen to a couple times. And maybe there'll be more on this conversation. I would love if you want to join me. I think I mentioned this in the last podcast, but every Wednesday I'm doing a free thing. Wednesday mornings, 9 a.m. PST for all of summer. And we're just going to be looking at self-love in a different way, self-value, self-worth. And we're going to go through some kind of exercises to open up to more. What if now is the space, the time for us to really start to go, I matter. Not that you necessarily matter more than anyone. It's not about that. It's not a competition. If you matter, doesn't mean that someone else doesn't matter. It's actually acknowledging that like you matter in the world. And you are valuable. Your being is valuable. And you can ask for more than what you got. You can actually ask for more. And you can have a standard where maybe what you have right now does not work for you. And it could be in one little area. It could be your whole life. And you're like, yeah, nothing works for me. I remember after my first certified facilitators training, I came home and I looked around and I was like, oh my God, none of this matches my being. None of this works for me. I spent like a whole year, like creating a whole different reality for myself, a whole nother world. Because somehow through that process, my like self-worth grew and my standards grew with it. And that might show up more because as we grow and as our self-worth grows and our value grows and our consciousness expands, we're going to be asking for more. It's only natural and more becomes available. So what are your standards for you? You as a being. And what are your standards for your body? And look at those maybe like individually, and then you could look at them as a whole. Do you feed your body whatever crap is available? I know I went through a period of time where we were so poor. I literally either wouldn't eat, or if I did, I ate like really like low quality food because that's what I could afford. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't eat. So say you're like, I need to raise my standard here. That doesn't mean you don't feed your body if that's all you have available, but you have that acknowledgement of the energy of like, you know what? This does not work for me. Universe, can you help me here? I require something greater. Show me the way. And you just move forward and follow that thread of lightness, and it will lead you. Suddenly, like, people are dropping off yummier food. Maybe someone invites you out to dinner. Maybe suddenly then your income comes up. So, like, you never know how it's going to show up. But just start with that. Does this actually work for you? Where have you settled? Where have you like been accepting like less than what truly is your standard? And what if you shifted that? What if you actually grew that? What if you asked for a higher standard of living? What if you upgraded your life? Upgraded the people around you, upgraded the way that people treated you. Doesn't even necessarily mean that people go away, but it might end up being a vulnerable conversation where you're like, you know what? Does it actually work for you, for me, for you to judge me? So if we're going to continue being friends, this needs to change. Woo! I hope this was a contribution to you. It feels like the beginning of a much bigger conversation, but there's a lot of energetics of this podcast. So like I said before, you might want to listen to it a couple times, see what it starts to unravel. And if you know someone that needs to hear this, please send it to them. Please share. So grateful for everyone that does. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you for exploring the curious universe with me. Your curiosity matters. And what if together we could create a greater, more curious world?